Good evening. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, has likened the problem of high unemployment, especially among the youth, growing inequalities and low growth, to the famous James Bond cocktail. The OECD chief recently said that this combination, when an economy shakes together but does not stir, can become very, very dangerous for the world. Pop culture references aside, the OECD in its latest global overview said this month that leading indicators for the 34-nation body point to weakening growth in coming quarters for most major economies. The OECD also gave its opinion on India's growth. The country's economic growth was mainly attributed to increasing purchasing power of the people and is now less dependent on external factors. There is a note of caution, however. The OECD Secretary General has said that India cannot be insulated from external factors. He said that India's most important trading partners like the Eurozone at about 0 or slightly negative growth percentage, the US below 2% and China about 7 to 7.5% are not doing well in terms of economic growth. As part of the ongoing OECD conference, Nobel Prize winning economist Joseph E. Stiglitz is also in India and in an important statement has said that in a trade-off between growth and moderate inflation, a developing nation like India should choose growth. Stating that inflation fears in India are overdone and exaggerated, Stiglitz had said that Reserve Bank of India or the RBI should look into cutting interest rates and pushing growth. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight on The Big Picture, I'll ask my panelists whether the RBI will take a cue and finally move on interest rates in its upcoming meeting on October the 30th. We'll also explore both sides of the growth-inflation dynamic and put Mr. Stiglitz's prescription in front of my panelists. And joining me in the studio will be Prasenjit, Bose, Economist, as well as Priyanranjan, Managing Editor of the Financial Chronicle. Also on the show tonight is Renu, Kohli, former staff member of the RBI, as well as the IMF. I welcome you all to The Big Picture. I'd like to start, however, with Prasenjit, if I could. Before I throw, Prasenjit, India-specific queries at you, let's talk about the global outlook. Shaken, not stirred, a very dangerous cocktail. The signs look ominous. The US is struggling. The Eurozone is pretty worse off. My question, of course, they're saying, experts all over the world are saying that the US has a fiscal cliff to climb. In your opinion, has the global economy failed to rally? And if they have, why exactly?
Well, I think that the answers are inherent in what you asked. You see, first of all, I think the entire Eurozone is headed for another recession. And the reason why this has happened is precisely because of the fiscal fundamentalism, which has gripped all the advanced countries today. This whole talk about the American economy facing a fiscal cliff, these are very highly exaggerated fiscal concerns. And it is precisely because of the drastic austerity measures that have been very prematurely brought into Europe, across all the governments of Europe. They have all followed austerity measures, cutbacks in social spending at a time when the economy was doing badly. That was bad economics right from the beginning. You had huge protests all over the European countries, and even today they are continuing. I think it is because of this muddle-headed approach of pursuing austerity at a time when more spending was required that you are finding this crisis that is happening today. So I think that the governments and these international institutions, they have got their priorities wrong.
Very, very pertinent point. Before I come to Priyanranjan, I'd like to go to Renu Kohli, quickly across to Renu Kohli. You heard what Prasenjit Bose just said. Right from the beginning, he says that austerity measures at a time when more spending was required was the wrong step to take. Do you agree with him?
Well, we are analyzing in hindsight, of course. My view is, I agree with Mr. Bose, most of what he has said. But I would like to add to his comments, which is that there are deep structural problems in the Eurozone, which partly stem from that of integration, which was incomplete. It was just monetary integration. And what the crisis has shown is, exposed, as Mr. Stiglitz himself put it, a dynamically imbalanced economy. Having said that, the structural problems in Eurozone will take time to sort out, because they refer to an equalization of competitiveness and productivity across North and South. So Germany, and that leads us into the political arena, Germany has to overcome its traditional hesitation or aversion to a little bit higher inflation. It has to accept that, it has to increase its demand, and by contrast, the southern countries, which are at the heart of this problem, have to regain their competitiveness. Now that kind of rebalancing does not come overnight, because it affects the lives of people, and it also implies political adjustments. And in my view, the Eurozone is a bit stable, and one cannot say whether it will be stable for the next 6 months or 1 year or, dip again. But I think these problems will take time.
Right, Renu, let me go quickly across now to Mr. Dash. Are inefficient policies, short-sightedness and a lack of political will in the case of the US, and an insurmountable amount of debt in the case of the Eurozone to be blamed for the lack of recovery, or are there other reasons as well?
Well, definitely the debt overhang or the debt problem in Europe is a massive problem. But as has been pointed out earlier, Europe has huge structural issues. And the unification, for instance, the monetary union without a fiscal coordination or fiscal policy coordination or a fiscal union was never actually sustainable. They are confronted with this issue, and so basically what has happened is, whereas you've had a single currency and a monetary union, you have not had banking supervision on an European basis, and least of all, you have had no coordination among the government's ability to spend. So each government has decided how to go about it. They have gone about it merrily accumulating debt, and some of them find themselves at a position that it is easily said that they should be spending more to revive their economies. But the question is, many of those countries today are in no position to get the money to spend more. So that is the basic problem is with European structural issues that Europe is confronted with.
Right. You have a point to make. I'll ask you a question after.
Yeah, just short point. You see, it's today, of course, they don't have have money to spend, but the point is that the structural issues that were referred to, what are those structural issues? You see, there have been gainers and losers of this European Union game. Now, you have economies which are now being called the European periphery. They have actually become reduced to almost like third world countries, in Greece, for instance. Now, why has it happened? Because you have a monetary integration process which is being driven by the big bankers in the interests of the big financial institutions, where issues like, developing national industry, Greece, for instance, was completely dependent on a few sectors like financial sectors, tourism, shipping. So, once the global recession has set in, these economies have just gone for a toss. Then your tax revenues, start falling. Then you start accumulating your debt, and then now you have a fiscal problem and a debt overhang. So let us not put cart before the horse. Let us not say that the main problem is with debt. The main problem is the financial crisis and the recession, which was brought because of the speculation and the financial excesses of the big financial companies and the big banks. Well, they have been bailed out.
Absolutely.
and nobody is blaming them for anything. The problem is all because of the governments and their fiscal irresponsibility. I have a bit of a problem with this line of
Prasenjit, we have to change tack. Let's come to India now. I want my panelists to concentrate on India now. The OECD opines that the purchasing power in India has increased. That has increasingly fueled growth in India. It's not exclusively relying on external factors. That much we all agree on. But we still have enough cause to worry, don't we? And let me put this question to you, Mr. Dash. We still have enough cause to worry. Why? Because our largest trading partners, the US, growth below 2%, Eurozone slightly negative, China around 7%. That is bound to pull down our economy as well, even if we don't rely on external factors.
See, there is no denying the fact that over the years, recent years, our dependence or linkages with the global economy has increased. And both, our trade linkages and investment linkages. As a result, we are not immune from what has been happening in the global economy, especially with our major trading and investment partners. Having said that, I would say that India being driven by the purchasing power of its own people is not quite a new phenomenon. We've mostly been driven by our own strength. We are a large economy with large domestic demand, which is a growing demand, and that is the mainstay of our economy, which would drive growth. Now, if we have a favorable external environment, then it comes as the the icing on the cake. But If you, on the other hand, if you are faced with an adverse external environment, that surely brings down our efforts of driving growth.
Right, right. Very briefly, Renu, Kohli, if I could ask you, we have to go into a break, but I want to ask you the same thing. Concerns about the US economy struggling, we should be worried, shouldn't we, right now?
Yes, of course, we should be worried because as Mr. Dash explained quite clearly that India's linkages with the global economy have deepened, and India gets affected by what happens in US and Europe through the trade channel, through the financial channel, and also through the confidence channel. This is also all happening at a time when the Indian economy, the macro, is in a very precarious macroeconomic condition. It has both, imbalances, internal as well as external, and it is heavily dependent upon capital flows for financing its current account deficit. And therefore, the lack of export demand globally is affecting it adversely on the one hand by reducing its foreign exchange earnings, and on the other hand, the fact that there is risk aversion amongst foreign investors is affecting India, capital inflows into India, and that is affecting the financing of the current account deficit.
Right. On that note, Renu, we'll take a break. After the break, I want my panelists to concentrate on what Nobel Prize-winning economist Joseph E. Stiglitz has said today. He, of course, has made a very important statement. All that and more after the short break. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to the big picture now. Joseph E. Stiglitz is in India right now as part of the OECD conference. Today, in an interview, he said he's clearly batting for growth over inflation targeting, and he said that I would plump for growth any day. According to him, the top priority should be growth and not inflation targeting. If I could come to Prasenjit and ask him, your thoughts and comments on what Mr. Stiglitz has said today.
You see, first of all, I think that in putting this trade-off as the main, as in the center of his theoretical universe, I think Professor Stiglitz is pretty off the mark. I mean, he's a very respected economist, and I have great regards for him. But especially when you are analyzing the developing country like India, you have to first of all understand why this inflation is happening. The growth-inflation trade-off comes when the inflation is basically demand pull. You actually have inflation because more and more people are spending and you don't have so much of supply. In India, that is not the case. You have huge idle resources in the economy, you have huge unemployment. The reason why India's inflation is essentially cost push. You are having input prices are going up because your fuel prices are going up, your fertilizer prices are going up, your agricultural costs are going up, therefore food prices are going up, and so on and so forth. Now, when you have such cost push inflation, this trade-off doesn't work. So I think that Professor Stiglitz has got his basic understanding of the Indian economy slightly wrong.
Right.
I'd just like to add that you see, the Reserve Bank has increased interest rates. I think that was not a very intelligent thing to do because it has definitely affected growth, but it has not been able to check inflation.
That's
and
a concern.
Inflation is going up again.
That's a concern.
So I think that to rely upon the interest rate and monetary policy and the Reserve Bank to tackle inflation in the first place, I think is a erroneous policy view.
Let's just ask the former RBI person on the panel today, Renu Kohli. First of all, thoughts on Professor Stiglitz's comment on the growth inflation dynamic, and you heard what Prasenjit Bose also said. Is the RBI or giving the RBI the job to tackle inflation, is that the wrong strategy?
No, I don't think it is the wrong strategy because all over the world, central bank's primary mandate is that of price stability, and in India, it's a kind of a dual mandate, it's price and growth stability. Having said that, it's not just the primary task, it's not just the sole task of the monetary authority to bring inflation under control, particularly if the sources of inflation are arising more from a lack of supplies than from monetary factors. And in the instant case, there has been a lack of monetary fiscal coordination. But moving to that, I think the trade-off between growth and inflation is only in the short term. And I differ with Mr. Bose in the context of, because India's had persistently elevated inflation over the last 3-4 years, and it is stubborn, it's refusing to come down, and in part the reasons for inflation at such elevated levels it's automatically had a constraining effect upon growth. And we can see in the macroeconomic aggregates, we can see that the savings rate is down. Why is the savings rate down? Because savers are not getting, inflation is taking away eroding their real returns on their savings, and therefore it is pushing them towards inflationary hedges like real estate and gold that has directly taken away from India's savings rate. At the same time, the government has been spending, and so public savings has gone down as well, which is now spilling over into an expanded deficit. Because after all, what is the current account deficit? It's the savings investment gap.
Renu.
So we can see that. We can also see an erosion in purchasing. Okay.
Let me come to Mr. Dash first. I want Prasenjit to respond to your comments, but first let me go to Mr. Dash. Your thoughts on Professor Stiglitz's trade-off between growth and inflation. Do you think India should actually make growth this first priority?
I think his, the prescription of Professor Stiglitz is the right prescription for the wrong country. I think he's, insofar as India is concerned, his prescriptions are completely misplaced. He says that 8% inflation is usual for a developing country. Yeah. Yes, it may be usual, but it is unacceptable. It's got huge social costs, and in a country like India, 8% is nothing new to us. But it doesn't mean that India can tolerate it, or the policies should endorse that kind of a rate, number one. Number two, I don't quite believe in this theory of growth-inflation trade-off. On the other hand, I tend to believe that in a country like India, if there is high inflation, then that is anti-growth. So if you have to promote growth in a country like India, then one has to first moderate inflation. Macroeconomic stability, of which inflation is a major factor, is a main thing for even investor confidence. So if, people like Renu was just mentioning, now because of the high inflation, you've had actually an impact on the savings rate and consequently on the investment rate, especially in financial investments. You've had some investment in, gold and real estate, as hedge against inflation. Now, so high inflation is bad for investment and bad for growth.
Right.
So that is number two, position. Third thing I must say, that as it's been pointed out, that the inflation in India is basically because of a cost push factor. Now, that being the case, we have gone about raising interest rates. Now, I don't quite again believe that raising interest rates has had an impact on growth, and it has slowed down growth.
Right, fair point.
Because I don't see in Indian context, whenever we've had high growth, historically speaking, we've had periods of reasonable price stability. So, I tend to believe that growth and high growth and stable prices tend to go together in India.
Right. Fair point. Fair point. I want you to respond to Renu's previous comments, and then I have a question for you on the savings rate.
No, I mean, I think some of it has already been covered by Mr. Das, so I would not, waste time over that. My only point is that, you see, the Reserve Bank has been following this high interest rate policy for quite some time now. My only, with due humility, my question is that what impact did it have on inflation so far? And the Reserve Bank should understand that, the kind of inflation we are having, as Mr. Das is saying, it's of a cost push kind. The Reserve Bank has very little to do as far as checking inflation is concerned. There are other steps, the steps undertaken by the government, which is required in terms of, public distribution system, stabilizing basic prices, so on and so forth. There are many other anti-inflationary measures that can be undertaken by the government, which are required today. I completely agree with what Mr. Das said, that the growth inflation trade-off perhaps works the other way around. That inflation actually has a detrimental impact on growth, because he mentioned one of the factors, there may be slight disagreements with the exact channels, but it's a fact that when prices are unstable, then it definitely has an adverse impact on the investment environment also. Your costs go up. But the main problem is what? What is the impact on the lives and livelihoods of the ordinary people?
Exactly, that's what I want to talk about.
Yeah, and there, I think that is precisely where this whole debate is taking place in a way which is missing that point. The point today is growth in India is slowing down. It is slowing down both because of global factors, because global factors do
and internal factors as well.
And internal factors as well. This whole story of the OECD that India's purchasing power is growing up hugely. It is only what is the segment of the population which is increasing, experiencing a huge increase in purchasing power. Maybe it top 20% of the population.
Let Renu make a point. Go ahead, Renu.
Yeah, I just want to make the point, because Mr. Bose is saying that Reserve Bank has been following a tight money policy for the last 3 years, and yet what impact it has had. My answer to that would be that we don't know what the rate of inflation would have been had a tight monetary stance not been followed by the central bank. Because even cost push inflation has, in the second round, will spill over onto other prices. And so, since we do not know the counterfactual, I think it's wrong to assert that the Reserve Bank's tight monetary policy has had no impact upon inflation.
Well, I'm only saying that
Renu, we have to take a small break right now. When I come back, I want to talk about what Prasenjit just mentioned, the effect on the common man. And even if the Reserve Bank of India and the country itself concentrates on growth, what good is that growth if a person has to survive in less than $1 a day? All that and more after the break. Welcome back to the big picture. Prasenjit Bose, I want to explore the other side of this issue. Economists like Professor Stiglitz seem to think that moderate inflation is acceptable. But what will happen to a person who's supposed to survive in less than $1 a day if inflation keeps creeping up, like it has been in the recent past? What good is industrial growth for a country like India where people can't afford to eat a decent meal a day?
Precisely. So that's what I was trying to, that's the point I was trying to make in the first place, that I think that Professor Stiglitz has focused upon a very, unimportant debate as far as the economic processes in India currently are concerned. Whether the Reserve Bank brings down its interest rate or not is not really the big issue. But inflation is a very big issue in India. We have had one of the longest bouts of double-digit food price inflation in the entire post-independence period. It has been going on for over 35 months. So, and it has to be a combined policy response from the government, which has not been coming. I don't know whether Professor Stiglitz is aware of the debates that have been going on over the inflation story. It has got linkages vis-a-vis what is happening to our farm sector. It has got linkages vis-a-vis the entire supply chain, what is happening there. And it has got a lot to do with for instance, commodity futures markets. So these things, I think these are the things that one should really look at when one is talking about the impact on the ordinary people. One short point I want to make. You see, as far as growth is concerned, one matter which is, I think, beyond any doubt and debate now, is that whereas India has seen, some degree of impressive growth rates over the past 3-4 years, it is now coming down. But despite that high growth, the employment growth rate has not really been very high. So it has been a jobless kind of growth.
Mr. Dash, you have a point.
As I was saying, growth and inflation or price stability go hand in hand. I do not see a trade-off. I do not see a conflict there, given good policies. Unfortunately, we have not had good policies. The government has been at a complete loss insofar as inflation is concerned. I wouldn't blame Professor Stiglitz, who comes from outside and goes around
really
the
know
whole
the
world, whole world, and gets confused about whether he's in Europe or in America or in India to be prescribing policies. But in the government itself has been at a loss. And we have a prime minister who's an economist, and when he took his office as prime minister, he said he will gain mastery over inflation shortly, but that never happened. Now, recently, the finance minister gave his own diagnosis of why inflation. And there he pointed out two things. He said on the supply side, when there is less goods in the market, so prices tend to go up. On the demand side, the government has been spending a lot of money, on productive subsidies and things like that. So that raises the money supply in the market. So there is too much of money.
Right.
So these are the two factors.
Right.
But, we have not, the government itself has not been able to understand. For instance, food inflation. Now, last year, we've had double-digit food inflation throughout. Why did that happen? Last year, we've had a bumper record crop in most of the crops. So, despite a bumper crop, the supply side argument falls. So we have to see much deeper.
Right.
And the government of the day has no idea, and most of the economists, I'm sorry to say,
I have to cut in
also do not know
how to. I have to cut in there, Mr. Dash. I have to cut in there. I need to get Renu's reaction on this. We are running short of time, Renu. But first of all, let me ask you this: do you see the RBI taking a cue, because so many opinions seem to be coming the way saying that growth should be the first priority? Do you see RBI taking a cue? And also, do you agree with the two gentlemen sitting next to me right now saying that Professor Stiglitz perhaps gave the right prescription for the wrong country?
On your question one, if central bankers were taking their cues from different interests and groups or analysts and all, then I think monetary policy would be bouncing all over the place. So I do not see the RBI taking a cue from this or that analyst or policy maker or economist. It will make its judgment on the basis of the aggregate evidence that it sees. Second, prescriptions. Just remind me what your second question was.
It was whether you agree, whether you agree with the takeaway that Professor Stiglitz gave the right prescription for the wrong country. Very briefly, Renu, we are out of time.
Well, I think in the immediate term, I don't think the prescription stands valid.
Right, that's the answer I was looking for right now. We have to end the program right now. We're completely out of time. I must thank my guests, Renu, Kohli, Priyanranjan, Dash, as well as Prasenjit, both for coming and joining us on The Big Picture. Till the next edition of The Big Picture, Athar Khan saying goodbye, good night, and thank you for watching.